And good afternoon. My name is Ryan Belmore. I'm the owner and publisher of What's Up Noop, and we are back here with another edition of our interview series. And joining us today is Newport Mayor Xay. Xay, how are you?
I'm great, Ryan. How are you?
Good. It's been, well, let's see. We last talked at the end of November, somewhere near the end of November, just before the inauguration and the swearing in and all of that fun. How's the last month been?
It's been excellent. It has been terrific getting into City Hall, getting to know the team up here a bit better, spending some time with our fellow counselors. And so it's been an exciting first month, and we're really geared up for what 2023 holds.
Biggest surprise?
Biggest surprise so far. I think it was a pleasant surprise, which is just how engaged my fellow counselors have been right out of the gate on starting to work on issues, on getting to know one another, on getting oriented with the city itself. They have shown a tremendous amount of energy and enthusiasm for really rolling up their sleeves and getting to work. So I am very excited to be working alongside them, helping the entirety of the council succeed and achieve its objectives.
I always wonder, and I guess it's a nerd question of mine, but how does the logistics of your life work? I mean, this is not a full-time position. You have a full-time job, you have a family, you have a life. How do you make that transition over a month from having this big responsibility all of a sudden placed on you?
That's a great question. I'm still trying to figure out the answer to that, in case you can't tell from the bags under my eyes and a little bit more gray that I have than maybe a month earlier. I'll tell you that one key is having a terrifically supportive spouse. My wife, Alicia, is with me every step of the way, and I could not be doing this without her full support and energy and enthusiasm consistently at every single turn. So having that patient partner who's willing to be that unofficial sounding board for you, who understands when maybe vacation or dinner plans get canceled because there's work that needs to be done or there's an issue that comes up, is really helpful. Let me give you one example. Christmas weekend, this past weekend, I unfortunately got a stomach bug, which took me offline. I know there's been a lot going around recently. And I had just gone through that stomach bug. And I said, what I'm really concerned about right now is that the city doesn't have a standing overnight warming center. We've got these series of little warming centers set up. And it's something that we're working on. And Angela McCall was very helpful, brought it to my attention. She's now got a great partnership with Councillor Segley where they're working on the issue. But I said, but in the meantime, until we get something up and running, I'm really worried about what's going on in our city out there right now. And I've been bedridden for a couple of days. I really want to make sure everything's okay. So she said, you know what, let's take a ride. So we piled into the car on Christmas Eve and then on Christmas Day as well. And she drove me around, since I was a little bit too delirious to be driving, just to check in and see how the city itself is doing after the storm and to make sure that there's nobody outside. That's a partnership at the end of the day. And so the city of Newport really lucked out in getting a 2-for-1 special with both of us being engaged on the city's behalf.
Yeah, I mean, it is something you have to get used to, kind of leaving your phone on your nightstands and being able to take calls for snowstorms or emergencies or gas emergencies, whatever it may be. It's kind of it is a 24/7 responsibility.
Yeah, and I had a little bit of insight into what that might be like. I did share the state's largest drinking water utility for a period of time. And so I was used to that nature of being on call, particularly when we would have large weather events that could impact our utility as a whole. So that was helpful. But you're right, the city itself, it ticks constantly and it constantly has things going on. Being in communication is very important. And it's been great to settle into that, and also to have the support of the city's team fully embracing and keeping me in the loop on everything that's going on, and also taking the feedback that I provide to them.
Less than a month in, so unfair to ask, but any big wins already?
I think the biggest win really was our first council meeting. I'm not sure how many of you got to watch that initial meeting, but to have the council all engaged and working together was a really, really terrific feeling. Coming in on day one with everybody sitting up on the dais, working together, being free of distractions, really thinking about how we make this council feel more approachable, feel more understandable, but also being entirely engaged on each of the issues that come up in front of us, wholly focused on the matters at hand, felt really good. And that was a really nice victory out of the gate. At that first meeting, some might have noticed that I asked Dave Carlin to step up into a new role of parliamentarian to help explain a little bit better as to what the specific procedures are that help our meetings move along. And then conversely, Lynn Segley has really elevated the previous role that she had as vice chair into one now that really delves a bit more in depth into exactly what all these different licenses are that are coming before us and why we handle certain items certain ways. To have our fellow councilors stepping up to help provide that context, to make the council meetings more understandable, I think out of the gate was a really great tone to set and a great initial victory. Also, all the councilors across the board are really engaged in the conversations. At that first meeting, you saw Angela McCalla, our councilor from the First Ward, step in with some really good points about whether or not the plans that were being put forth for certain intersections really incorporated prior complete streets and green and complete streets type practices that the city's committed itself. You saw Mark Romley step in and really, continue to look out for neighborhood interests, continue to look out for the city's bottom line. So we've now got a council that's, making sure that everybody has a role and a voice in helping make sure the city continues moving forward.
One particular item on that docket did grab some attention, and I'm just wondering your take. The special events license for the Newport Folk Festival, Newport Jazz Festival from Newport Festivals Foundation. Councilor Romley as well as Councilor Carlin brought up the idea of, is there any possibility for revenue sharing? And I've been surprised how much I've heard of, kind of feedback is this the new way that council is going to look at generating revenue? Are they going to look for revenue sharing, from nonprofit events or event organizers or things like that? Kind of any background or insight into where that's going?
I'll give some general background, right? Which is that our council, particularly newer councilors, are taking a fresh look at any opportunity we can to help bring in revenue to offset the burden that is carried by our residents. And so we're still feeling out, I think, exactly where the right places are to go about sourcing that revenue, but we're going to ask the question. And so that's going to be a consistent lens that policy decisions are looked through whenever we're considering items before the council is, have we thought about whether or not this is something that is actually helping us rebalance the burden that's borne by our residents? One of the burdens that was talked about in that meeting was traffic, right? That is an enormous amount of traffic burden that's placed on the city. What are we doing to make that better in the future? And we're constantly looking at ways to improve that traffic flow and offset the ways that traffic is impacting us. So I think that, whether or not ultimately a revenue share is appropriate in certain situations is a matter of policy that we need to consider, but at least asking the questions and making sure that people realize when they come before our council that we are constantly looking through the lens of how we help make sure we mitigate the impact on our residents is something that is going to be important in conversations in the future.
Yeah, and full disclosure for those that don't know it, I am on the board of Fort Adams Trust, and I think that's why it caught particular attention. I heard it from some other event organizers. Is the city going to get in this business? And if they want to do revenue sharing, are they also going to do expense sharing and liability sharing and things like that? So I figured I'd pass that on and also get your take on where you thought that was coming from.
Yeah, and I don't think as a policy we are looking to move towards a quote unquote revenue sharing structure, particularly not with nonprofit entities. These are organizations that bring a tremendous amount of economic activity to our city. It brings a tremendous amount of character and culture that are critically important to what make Newport such a wonderful place to live, work, and visit. But I do think we are going to be looking very seriously at, to the extent that there are impacts on our community, how we potentially look to offset those impacts through revenues that we're able to pursue.
Cy, before I ask you about some more of the issues around the city or opportunities around the city, anything else from the meeting that you wanted to bring up that happened during the first and only meeting in December?
I think overall, it's sort of the tone that you're going to be seeing coming out of this council, right? The real objective here for me as the mayor is to make sure that we have a council that works. And what I mean by that works, it's a council where first people feel they can approach either individually or before the body itself with ideas and concerns that they may have. Second, it's a council where every councilor is able to substantively contribute to the direction of the city itself. I don't want this to feel like there's a particular faction on one side or the other that's constantly moving the agenda. This really needs to feel like a council where everybody has their role in their lane and they're able to take and tackle issues that are important to the constituents that they represent and that they care about and feel that they have the expertise and the bandwidth to help address. And so I think out of the gate, that new tone is something that's going to be really important, that we as a council as a whole are working very hard to make sure we maintain. Look, we are all new to each other, right? And 40% of our council is actually brand new to the council itself. So this first month, look at through the lens of this is sort of an orientation period for all of us. We are getting to know what it's like to be up there on that dais. We're getting to know each other and the quirks that we each have and things that are important to each one of us. And we're also getting to know our constituents a bit better and making sure our constituents understand us in the role of elected councilors. And so that initial orientation period is really important. A lot of time has been spent meeting with different officials in the city to ensure that we also all really understand exactly where the city is on different issues, how the city functions as a team, and how and where we can fit into that team to ensure that residents' voices are being heard, but also that the city itself is receiving the support it needs to achieve the many different things that we need to as a community. Second, we're starting to shift into this more organizational mode right now. We're starting to look at what are the goals and items that we want to accomplish as a council over the course of our term, and what are the key performance indicators that we need to be tracking to make sure that we stay on track. What we don't want to see happen is we have all these great ideas that come out of the gate, and we pass a resolution about one of those ideas, and then all of a sudden nothing ends up happening, or we circle back in 6 months and say, hey, wait a second, where are we on that particular issue? We're trying to be much more routine and regular with how we approach the ideas that we're pursuing as a council to make sure that things actually come to reality and fruition at the end of the day. The city needs progress on a lot of different fronts right now, and that's going to take a lot of discipline. And so we're trying to make sure that we are organized in a way that ensures we can get that done. Third, once we get through this initial goal setting process that we're in, and this is really a two-phase process. Phase one is the goal setting meeting that we're going to be having on the 4th. Where we actually get out what the priorities are for each one of us as counselors and where we want to see ourselves head in the next couple of years. Step 2 is a medium to long range plan. This is a strategic planning process that the council hasn't undergone in a number of years, and it's time for us to refresh what the intermediate and long-term view for this vision for the city itself is. Third, once we get through that initial planning process, this puts us now into February. This is where you're going to really see things kick into a higher gear. This is where you're going to see counselors shift their attention from just simply stating their priorities to actually helping to move and make sure those priorities are implemented. So expect to see us pairing off and working in teams to pursue making sure the city actually accomplishes the many things that both it's been pursuing for a while, but also that we feel are top priorities for the administration itself to be focused on.
So when we talk to you in, let's say, February or March, we should be able to get a good roundup of what the priorities are for the current council.
Absolutely. And here's why that timing is so important and why we've been very focused on getting our ducks in a row and really understanding where our priorities align as a council. There are a couple things that are going to be happening in that February timeframe. First, this is really when the budget is getting put together for the city itself. The budget is the prime policy document that governs how the city has the resources to pursue the different priorities that we have. And ultimately, the statement of where you're putting your money is exactly what defines what a community's actual priorities are. So it's critically important for us to really make sure that we have a clear vision headed into that budgeting process so that the department directors can make sure that the respective budgets they each have reflect that. The second is that this is also our opportunity to engage with our state delegation, to let them know what our priorities are as a council, and to make the ask that we can of them for assistance from the state in the different areas that we want. Sometimes this assistance is legislative, right? A good example of a legislative priority was the legislation that Lauren Carson championed that allowed for a two-tiered residential tax structure. Other times it's going to be financial. I think we have a number of needs that the state should be stepping up to help us with, and the council itself needs to pull together which of those they feel are priorities that we should be approaching our state delegation to help us with. We have a phenomenal state delegation representing Newport up at the State House. Lauren Carson, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the hardest workers that I've ever seen in the legislative branch. She is constantly in motion. She's very connected. Rep. Marvin Abney, our chair of the House Finance Committee, probably one of the top 3 most powerful people in the state legislature, hails from Newport and is constantly focused on how we can ensure that communities across Rhode Island are equitably resourced and listening to what it is that they need. So we've got a great pipeline directly there to be leaders in municipal policy with the state Finance Committee chairman. And similarly, you have Chairman DePalma and now Chairwoman Ure, who are rightfully powerhouses within the state Senate itself, and who wield an enormous amount of power to help Newport advance its agenda at the end of the day. So I'm really excited to be working with all of them once the council gets settled on exactly what its vision and priorities are, so that our state can help provide the adequate resourcing we need to actually accomplish our goals.
Sai, let's talk about two or three things that people would like, priorities in their life, or that they would like to see priorities in yours. What's the latest, or what are you, the city, doing to work with Rhode Island Department of Transportation to kind of get this Pell Bridge ramps realignment projects, so people stop going over the bridge when they don't mean to? What are you and the city doing to try to make life easier for everybody?
Well, we'll do everything we can short of picking up a flag and a shovel to be out there, right? Look, transitions are really challenging anywhere in life, but particularly when it comes to construction and transportation projects. So patience is going to go a long way. I will be completely honest. I think the timing of this recent shift was really frustrating. We were on the cusp of making it through the holiday season when we know that we enter a very slow period. So to do the bridge realignment transition for this most current phase at the time when we did, I think was unnecessarily disruptive to both residents and to the businesses who are right there alongside the bridge. That was a really, really tough period of time. I will give Rep. Carson another shout out here for directly advocating for Newporters with the Department of Transportation to help us ease some of that pain. Increased signage is one way that's been improved. Newport police have been in constant contact with the DOT, helping to give them feedback on traffic and how to go about easing the traffic they're witnessing and seeing. So we'll keep working to improve that. The reality is that even with the better signage and better striping, that we're going to be living with the current structure more or less in this current form until the alignment process gets into its next phase in late spring. So we're doing everything we can to communicate better with DOT on improving the traffic flow that's out there, but it's going to take a lot of patience from us in the off season just to get through this next period.
Do you feel like, just a couple weeks in here, that DOT is listening to the council, the city is reacting, is willing to work with the city and local government to make this easier?
I do. I will say that the project manager on site with the DOT is responsive by email and very quickly when issues and items are raised. As I mentioned earlier, they are working with the Newport Police Department to help do this better as best they can. The reality is this is a very, very large construction project that has been on a set plan and schedule for a while. And so while we can ask for smaller tweaks to that project plan, while we can ask for better communication from them, to which they have been supportive and open, at the end of the day, it is just a process and a phase that we need to get through to get to the other side of this project.
Sticking in the area and doing all the greatest hits of 2022. One of the other things that I get emailed mostly about, and obviously it's private property and the city only has so much say, but have you heard anything in your first couple weeks in City Hall about what might be happening with the Carpinado property, formerly Newport Grand, formerly Newport Highlight, formerly Town Dump, whatever you want to call it these days? Have you heard anything over the last couple weeks?
We'd like to call it one of the most promising sites for development in Newport at this point in time, and a great opportunity for us to hopefully jumpstart development in this area. I know the Carpinado Group is focused on getting this site developed, and I know the City of Newport shares that vision and that hope. Right now, our city administration is leading those conversations to the extent that they occur. And so, I have to be respectful of making sure that we maintain the best positioning possible through those conversations by making sure they're led with a consistent face forward through that. But I do know that there's interest. I've had outreach from the Carpinado Group on getting this project moving again. So we're hopeful, right? When that bridge realignment project gets done and the rest of that land starts to get mitigated and put into good form for development, we should already have some things in motion up there with that specific property. So I know that we're all very focused on doing what we can to ensure that that building gets torn down and that parking lot is not a blight when people first pull into Newport.
And finally, where I'm going next, but I would say the final priority people would like added to your list, or 45% of Newport or 55% of Middletown. Anything new on the regionalization front?
So there are ongoing conversations about regionalization, I think, that are happening on a lot of levels. there are a bunch of complicated pieces to this, right? The first, and let's pull it out separately, is Rogers, right? Rogers is a project that has, because of increases in inflation, exceeded its original budget, and so we need to figure out a way to fulfill and get Rogers done. That in part has cracked open the door again from Newport's end on regionalization, and we've seen some level of appetite coming out of Middletown so far and its leadership, that they'd be willing to consider some form of a regionalized school. At this point, a middle school is what has been sort of floated and discussed out there. My focus right now is really on making sure that the school committee gets the resources it needs to get that Rogers project done. I think we as an island need to keep considering regionalization because of the potential it has to actually improve educational outcomes for our students, but that the focus of our conversations really needs to be on how regionalization can improve the academic outcomes for our students. Right now, similar to what we were experiencing over the past 6 months, regionalization and the conversations around it were being very driven by, hey, here's how we can increase the funding that we're getting for reimbursement on our public projects. That's very important. As I mentioned earlier with the conversations around our public budget, at the end of the day, finances enable you to do all these wonderful policy ideas that you may have. But I think the focus really needs to initially be on having a plan for how we improve education and then going about figuring out what the best ways to finance that plan. A lot of the conversations that are being pushed along on a timeline based on what state funding is available at this given moment in time. I think we really need to make sure that whatever we do with education, it's going to be right by students first. And once we have that sorted out, we can go about figuring out how we're going to pay for those changes that we need to make. Education on this island needs to get better. And this isn't just a Newport problem. Middletown shares this challenge and this issue. Our students deserve better. And so we need to make sure that our school committees are focused on getting that done. To the extent that regionalization does come up again, right? And I'm constantly participating in the forums that are being hosted on this issue and in conversations around it, which is great, but it really needs to be a grassroots-led effort. This really needs to be something that parents in our community feel is in the best interest of students. It cannot be another top-down driven policy solution. I think that our policymakers at the top did a very good job with putting together the best proposal they could in the last cycle. Unfortunately, it wasn't something that was driven at the grassroots level, and it didn't have the level of support that it needed to pass. It built a lot of great support because of the hard work of those civic leaders. But the one thing we learned is that this really has to be something that is driven by and pushed by the community itself. Parents are the ones who have a huge vested interest in making sure that their kids have a school system that's going to help them deliver. And so they're really the ones who need to be driving this process and who we should be listening to with regards to whether or not regionalization is going to be right for Newport and Middletown.
Xay, those are probably the three biggest things, as well as I want to give credit. I hear a lot from readers about the two-tiered tax program, and I encourage people to go to the City of Newport's website because the application process will open on January 1st, where they can fill out the application, take next steps, find out more. Besides, I guess, those four items, is there anything else that you're hearing from people about, or concerns or opportunities that you want to address?
Well, thanks for touching the housing. I am not going to be coming on What's Up Newport ever and not mentioning housing. It is without a doubt one of those issues that underpins almost every aspect of what we're dealing with. We just talked about education, and obviously housing is having a big impact there as well. But the other issue I would flag is infrastructure. Right, we still need to be very serious about pursuing infrastructure solutions for Newport in a holistic fashion. There's a public posting out there right now for a grant writer to assist the city with the pursuit of dollars. We are participating in Compete RI, which is a collaborative that's helping us pursue federal funding. But you go through storms like we recently had over this past holiday weekend, and you realize just how vulnerable Newport is, not just in the midst of a major hurricane, but even now these more routine, regular weather events. So infrastructure will be focused on that consistently. I'll give you another good example, right? Take that North End development project. A lot of that's wetlands. And so we need to figure out how we sort through those wetland issues up there to ensure that that's an area that's going to be developable in the long term for economic development. So infrastructure is going to be top of mind consistently throughout this administration. And I really appreciate the opportunity to slide in yet another priority that we're focused on.
Yeah, and I want to point out, in case people haven't seen our previous conversations, or our last conversation, I should say, This two-tiered tax program in housing and affordable housing is just it's not this and then done. You have a multi-step plan. If your priorities connect with the rest of the council and they all decide to move forward in what you've talked about in the past, but this is just step one of multiple steps to fix the issue of housing in Newport.
Exactly, Ryan. We're policymakers, and good policymakers use all the tools they have available to them. One of those tools is this two-tier tax rate, and this is a really powerful one. So we've got to get this right. And in order to get it right, we need the support and cooperation from residents to actually apply. And I want to remind your listeners, this isn't just for owner-occupied structures. This is also for structures that are rented to Newporters year-round. So if you're a resident living in a structure, you should reach out to your landlord and say, hey, I just want to make sure you saw this and know that you can apply for this, because it will have a material impact on the rents that are being paid. Over 55% of Newporters are renters right now. And so making sure that they have some stabilization in the rents that they're paying is really important. This is one of those tools to do that. Another tool in that toolbox is the enforcement that we have on Airbnbs. We need to be taking very seriously Airbnbs and short-term rentals in our neighborhoods, ensuring that those that are operating are being done in a compliant manner, and also those that aren't are being shut down accordingly. And so we will be tracking on a regular basis both how many Airbnbs the city has, but also enforcement actions against those Airbnbs that are functioning out there. That takes care of, or at least starts to address how we slow the conversion of our residential housing stock into essentially short-term rentals. What we need to refocus on is how we actually ensure there are more housing units available for residents. There are a couple different ways that we're looking at doing this, but one important way is going to be a medium-term project, which is taking a second look at our zoning codes. Right now, the majority of properties in our residential districts are non-conforming. That means that their lot coverage exceeds what is typically permitted per zoning. So anything they do, if they want to put an HVAC unit on the outside or a porch or minor changes and alterations, are requiring zoning variances. And this isn't something that is affordable or convenient for middle-class homeowners. So we need to be taking a look at overhauling and modernizing our zoning code, which is something that we are much past doing to ensure that Newport is a community where homeowners actually can afford to own their homes and make modifications in ways that is affordable, reasonable, straightforward, and done on a clear basis. Second, we need to be looking at the existing structures that we have on this island. 90% of Newport is already built out, and how we actually use those structures for housing. Sometimes these are big scale projects like the Coggeshall School, which should be developed into housing over the course of the next couple of years. Other times, it's looking at a more disparate, type issue. Take accessory dwelling units, an area that the Rhode Island General Assembly focused on extensively in this last session. Newport needs to look at whether or not we should be enabling accessory dwelling units to be used for housing in Newport, and what changes we need to make to actually incentivize the rental of those accessory dwelling units to residents on the island.
Two last quick questions. January meeting, anything, the agenda is not out yet, but anything coming up that excites you or that people should be keeping an eye on?
Well, I'd say two things. First, we're just having our goal setting session just the week prior. So because of public posting requirements, we won't have quite enough time for that agenda to really reflect our top priorities. But I do think you can see us start to tackle some of those quality of life issues, those nuisance type issues that are annoying to residents that probably deserve a bit more attention from our public safety department. So that's all the foreshadowing I'll do on that. But I'll tell you that our counselors are very focused on this as an issue. They are listening to the community, and they're thinking innovatively about ways to help solve that. So stay tuned and keep an eye on that for the next council meeting in January.
And then anytime we do this, I want to start this as a new thing, but call to action for residents, business owners. What can people do? What is there to do out there that you would like people to get involved? Obviously, there's always boards and commissions. What else do you need to do? You need to hear from residents and business owners? Do you need them? Obviously, January 1st, they can start to fill out their two-tiered tax revenue application. What else can they do for you?
Yeah, that two-tier tax revenue application really is a high focus for us from a communications perspective for the city right now. We need to make sure that we capture as many residences as we can in that application process. There's step one, which is qualifying and figuring out how many people we have that actually are going to apply for this. Step two, which is, I think, just as important, is going to be determining exactly what that break is. And the data that we get from this initial round of application is going to help guide us to make sure that the decisions we make there are going to be impactful to helping us further the policy solutions that the prior council really intended when they enacted that. So thanks for the opportunity to give that additional highlight to it. You will be seeing us consistently talking about this right up until the deadline for those applications on March 15th.
Yeah, so the rates would probably be broken out in April or later spring.
Yeah, it'll be done as part of the budget process overall, right? That at the end of the day, we know how much it takes to run government, and so we need to balance making sure we get those revenues from places that are equitable to the tax base, and that's exactly when that process will get sorted out.
Excellent. Sai, is there anything that we missed today?
This is terrific. I appreciate the time, Ryan. I'm looking forward to coming back on soon.
All righty. Well, we appreciate it, and we will see you at City Hall or around town very soon.
Thanks. Happy New Year.
All right. Happy New Year to you as well. And we want to thank Sai for joining us. He carries on the tradition of the mayor of Newport, joining us every single month. We normally are also joined this week by this Newport school superintendent in a separate conversation, but we have given her the week off or the month off because they're off from school and the holidays and things like that. So we will be joined by Newport School Superintendent Colleen Burns-Germain at the end of January, and we will keep the conversations going. Thanks for watching.